Podcast, episode 2, let's go. Now, this is a conversation about quality. Still, the overarching theme is hypertrophy, but quality is the topic that we're going to dive into a little bit. And quality for me is such an interesting word ever since I read the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which is like a weird title, but it's a banger of a book. It's like 1970s. I think, philosopher. And it all talks about, it's basically this guy who goes on a trip with his son, and his son's autistic, and the book develops, and this guy basically writes, it sounds so boring, but he basically writes the instruction manuals on how to put things together, because he's so technical and understands the quality, and he's just like, goes into that absolute depth. That's the job he does. And it's just an exploration of what quality is. And like ever since that, I was just like, okay, this word is cool. You can apply it to anything, absolutely anything, and get a lot of benefit from that. If you pursue quality, I think that's the secret. And something, to be honest, when I was younger, I was kind of terrible at it. I was just get the things done. Oh, I was busy, do all the things. I got that lift in, or that session, tick the box, rather than looking at what I was ticking. What box am I actually ticking, and how could each tick be a better quality tick? So we've already discussed intensity, volume with training. Now we're going to talk a little bit more like the exercises to pick, rest, programming, all these other things. And to do this, we're going to explore quality. So initially, when I was first getting into training, a lot of my training, I would be in there, I'd be getting good work in. Arguably, you could say it's good work. However, I would say it could be significantly improved now. And what I mean by that is like maybe my program was 3 sets of 6 on the bench press, and anyone can do 3 sets of 6, but the reps and the quality can look so different. And what I mean by that, with regards to building muscle, you want those reps to be slow and controlled. And if you think about it like this, when you're developing a muscle and you're trying to cause a stimulus, cause an adaptation, create a stimulus, each millimeter of movement in that exercise is an opportunity to create that stimulus and adaptation. But if you're so obsessed with just getting the reps done and hitting the weight, and it's just like, all right, 3 sets of 6, I'm banging and I'm clanging, and these weights are going up and down like nothing else. From the chest to a lockout on a bench press, straight down to the bottom of a squat and bouncing back up. But how much time are you actually spending in between there on the journey, if you know what I mean? Spending a bit more time on the journey. And that is what I mean with quality. So whichever exercise you intend to pick, or whichever exercise you're doing, if you're trying to get hypertrophy as the greatest outcome, from the start to the finish of the rep is the most important part, the rep itself. You've got to move slowly, you've got to spend time in each position. Because if you think about these muscle bellies that we have, these tissues, each part of that tissue has a different job. You have a quadricep, which is 4 muscles, potentially 5, who even knows? But each part of that quadricep has a different job. It works harder at a different, when the knee and the hip are at a different joint angle. Therefore, if you're just clanging and banging, dropping the speed of light down to the bottom of the squat and standing back up as quickly as possible without any control, you are 100% leaving potential gains on the table. So overarching, if you're choosing an exercise, it doesn't really matter as long as you have high quality. And again, that is just control throughout the eccentric, throughout the way down, and even control on the way up, like a little bit of slow movement on the way up. But to dive a little bit deeper, of course, it does matter which exercise you're choosing, even though I just said it doesn't really matter. It does matter, of course. You want to choose exercises that enable you to take the joints of the targeted tissues through a as full range of motion as you can without compensating at another joint or eliciting pain in a joint or anything along those lines. That's the target when you're choosing an exercise. So for example, people love back squats. You want to go in and do back squats to build muscle. It's a decent exercise, but I'd probably say there are thousands other that are way better if the goal is to develop your legs, because the likelihood that you can maintain a upright axial skeleton, an upright torso while you're going through a back squat, which will enable you to maintain all the load on the tissues and the glutes, is extremely unlikely. So when you're training the quads and the glutes, what you're looking for is knee flexion and extension, and you're trying to control the axial skeleton. Basically, that is everything that's not your arms and your legs. You want a vertical translation of the rib cage and the pelvis and your head through space. So basically, your torso moves up and down as if it's in a lift or in an elevator shaft, and your knees enable you to do that. You stay upright as possible. Picture a perfect Asian squat or a Russian squat, depending where you're from. A perfect Asian squat. That's kind of what we're looking for with our squat pattern, and that will give you the best outcome with regards to hypertrophy, because you're not compensating through a joint. If your torso leans forward, you're not loading your quads and your glutes. You're loading your back extensors. You load your glutes a bit, but you're going to load your back extensors to the high heavens, which is why the back squat isn't probably the best choice for hypertrophy, because it's hard to maintain that vertical position with your torso. So when it comes to exercise selection, you want to choose exercises that set you up for success, which would be targeting those tissues that you want to develop. So for legs, a hack squat might be a better bet, or even a leg press might be a better bet than doing a back squat. A front squat might be doing a better bet, might be a better choice than a back squat, because it's easier to stay upright. If you do a front squat versus a back squat, it's easier to stay upright, therefore it's easier to target those tissues that you're trying to develop. Quick sip of coffee before we really get into this, and that is a kind of the principles you're looking for as you go through. So you should develop a standard for your exercise that you rate, that you respect, that you think will get you the most out of each exercise, and then you should go apply that to the exercises you want to choose. So that's mine for the squat. For a hinge pattern where I want to develop the glutes and the hamstrings, what I'm looking for is more than just a horizontal translation of the pelvis. I'm looking for true hip flexion in a closed chain. So basically that means I'm looking for the butt to go back relative to the knee and the shoulder while keeping my feet on the ground for a hinge pattern. And that's going to ensure I'm loading the glutes properly, and that's really hard to do without compensating. But that's just another example. And then you want to choose exercises that set you up for the most success for meeting that standard. Same thing with a bench press. What are we looking for? We're looking for a full elbow, shoulder extension into flexion. Bit of abduction into adduction. We're standardizing that movement. That's how we're going to train the chest, train the shoulders, train the triceps. And a few overarching principles are that I would suggest for exercise selection is you should standardize the position of all your other joints that you're not trying to target. You should keep other joints fixed for the muscles that you're not trying to engage. If you're going through a bench press and your hips are moving all over the shop, your butt's coming up off the bench, you're loading more than just your chesticles and your deltoids and your triceps. You're loading other tissues. You're probably going to load your lower back, you're probably going to load your quads, which has a place in time, but when we're talking about hypertrophy, we want to keep the rest of the body fixed in place, and we're just moving the bones of the arms and the clavicle and the scapula. That's all we're trying to move, and you should set yourself up for success with that. I think that this is one of the reasons why machines are so great. You get yourself fitted in there, and there's support everywhere around you. So for a chest press machine, you've got unlimited support. You can just sit there. I'd even recommend raising your feet up so you don't have to worry about hip extension, because if you don't have that and your feet are flat on the floor, you're going to compensate and you won't be able to target the tissues as effectively, because your body will be like, well, I'm looking for movement, there is movement here, but I don't actually have that hip extension available or that movement option available, so I'll compensate, and it just turns into a shit show. If you wonder why, like, sometimes your shoulder might hurt, or a joint might, if a joint hurts in a movement, there's 100 reasons why, but one of those reasons why would be the biomechanical reason, and that is you're forcing your body into a position that it doesn't actually truly have, so you'll compensate somewhere else to kind of try and find it. This is most obvious in the hinge, when people don't have that true hip flexion and they just flex hard through the lower back, so they round through the lower back in order to try and create a space to extend the hip through, but really they don't have that true hip flexion, so they can't send their hip back, and it just looks like they're flexing through the spine, which is like they're compensating through the axial skeleton rather than through the hips. And a big principle is whatever joint you're moving, whatever joint in your body is moving, the muscles around that joint are going to be the ones working. So if your butt's moving backwards and forwards, the hip joints are moving, those are going to be the tissues that are going to be targeted. Whereas if your back's the thing moving, your muscles along your back are going to be the ones targeted. Now that might sound obvious, but you're searching for exercises that set you up for success with regards to not compensating through other joints that you're not trying to stimulate or adapt in that session. So exercise selection is really you need an understanding of what movement options you have available. Do you have full shoulder flexion? Can you stick your arms overhead without really compensating through your lumbar spine? Can you stick your hands overhead without your ribs flaring? There's loads of different things involved with each movement, and you need to have an understanding of your body and what you're capable of to find those exercises that will enable you to have success without compensating through other joints, which could lead to pain and take away from your progress. So you need to find how much shoulder flexion you have and find an appropriate exercise for that range of motion that you currently have. You can also, of course, work on improving your range of motion, but that's not part of today's discussion. We're just talking about hypertrophy. Exercises to pick. Choose ones that enable you to have control, a high quality rep on the way down and the way forward. High quality meaning you're just challenging the targeted tissues, you're not compensating through other joints, and you're not eliciting pain which could likely happen if you don't have that range of motion. You've chosen a poor exercise for you at this point in time. Awesome. Hope that is a little bit of an insight on exercises to pick. Any more questions, drop me a message on that. That's something we can dive in a little bit deeper. With regards to training frequency, I've touched on it a little bit briefly last episode. This feeds back into quality. With regards to training frequency, if you've been training for a while, it will likely be that you need to split up your training volume for a particular body part into 2 different days. Why is that? Because the amount of local and central fatigue that you will create from doing a certain number of sets in order to reach that volume will be too high to do on one day. For example, if you need to do 12 sets of quads in a week to get an adequate stimulus for that week, that's very fatiguing if you're doing these high quality, slow, controlled eccentrics and concentrics while avoiding any compensations through other joints, as discussed before. So to maintain that quality of rep, quality of set, you might need to change your training frequency. Training frequency is very much something that should be dictated by everything else that you understand about your body, understand about hypertrophy. you need to do more days if you're a more advanced lifter, and you need to spread your volume further across a week in order to maintain the quality. Quality is everything, and that's the pursuit that we are going after. With regards to when to progress, when are we actually going to progress on certain lifts, certain movements, and what does that actually look like? You can progress in tons of ways, and the pursuit of quality is a pursuit of progression. If your reps are slower, if they are more controlled, if you are compensating less, that is a huge PB. I would argue that is a better personal best than just throwing more weight on the bar or on the machine, on the stack, with no goal in sight, with no actual reasoning. Improving the quality of your reps is progression. So that's always the first place to progress. And once you've got that absolutely dialed, as discussed already, zero compensation through other joints, nice slow controlled concentric, eccentric, and you're able to maintain that and push that close enough to local fatigue and failure and cause an amazing stimulus, that's when you can think about starting to progress. Now that progression could be a bit more range of motion if you can maintain that zero compensation at unwanted joints. A little bit more range of motion could be the next thing you want to progress on. Once you've ticked all these boxes, these high quality boxes, that's when you're thinking about progressing. You could add weight, you could add reps. We're searching for this proximity to failure, and in order to hit that, you need to get close to failure. You need to get in a reasonable distance from failure at a high quality position, high quality execution in the exercise. So all these little things will dictate when you're progressing. It shouldn't just be like, all right, I did this weight last week, now it's a new week, therefore I'll add some weight on the bar. That is a amateur way to approach it. Only do that if the quality is maintained. Quality is everything. So that quality of that execution of that exercise will dictate when to progress, how to progress, etc., etc. And again, why quality is an overarching theme and why you should consider it with your training, this week in particular, is because you'll see if you pursue quality, all these other principles start to make sense. Like, for example, rest. How long are you resting before you go into the next set? And the answer is, how much rest time do I need in order to maintain the quality of the exercise? So I'm getting that close proximity to failure. I'm getting that zero
Sorry for interrupting the pod. I'm just here to advertise the programs. A couple programs in the link in the bio, in the link tree. Hypertrophy program if you want to get jacked out of your nut, and the fundamentals program if you're a bit bored of your training, you want to mix it up, you're fed up of just lifting weights in the gym and you want to come a little bit more athletic. Dive in to the link tree and get involved now.
Compensations through my other joints. I'm not limited by my cardiovascular fitness. For example, if you've just done a set and it's a hard set of, say, hack squats, you could be so fatigued, like you could be breathing very, very hard, so you can't go in and do another set straight away just because your cardiovascular, even if your muscles are ready, your cardiovascular health might not be there, your fitness might not be there, so you just need to rest. So give yourself a checklist. Is my cardiovascular system limiting me? Am I breathing out my butthole? Am I ready to do another high quality set? Are my local muscles ready to get me close enough to fatigue? Have they had enough time to reset? Is my central nervous system ready to put in that huge amount of effort again? Psychologically, do I feel ready? Am I set and ready to go? Like, do I need to get a song on and get my head pumped? Like, do I need to get going? So that's what I would consider when you're talking about rest. We're going over these things quickly, briefly. There's more in the ebook if you want to know more, and just drop me questions if you want to know more details. But generally, depends on your level of fitness, loads of factors, but you're looking between 3 to 5 minutes in between sets for rest. And then with regards to programming and hypertrophy, it's just a accumulation of all these principles coming together, and that will dictate how you program over time. Leading ones are, you got to be specific. If you want to build muscle, you've got to actually do the hypertrophy work. You need to bring that overload to your current system, your current muscular system. You need to challenge it, close proximity to failure. This will dictate a large amount about your programming. Are you currently able to lift the weights in a high quality manner at the prescribed rep range and not get close enough to failure to cause an adaptation? You're like 6 reps away when you finish a set from failure. That's a time to kind of increase the weight, the load, the range of motion, things that we've discussed already. That's when you would start to implement your programming. I would really recommend a flexible approach to programming. You need to be aware of your body, you need to auto-regulate, you need to understand when it's time to progress, and understanding these principles will enable you to do that. It takes away the guessing of like, am I ready to progress? You should know. You should know, and the newer you are to this, the quicker you should progress. Generally, if you get your things in order with regards to quality and your training is difficult, you should be progressing very, very regularly, particularly if you're not doing too much and the fatigue is overwhelming for the stimulus. Which brings us to this next thing, and the main part about programming is like managing your volume. When you start to train properly for hypertrophy, slow controlled movements, full range of motion, targeting the tissues that you want to target rather than compensating through other joints, it's very easy to do too much. I've generally found people have had amazing results with one very, very tough set per body part per session. So that might be 2 or 3 over the week, but when people are first training like this, they can be brutally sore, aka fatigued and stimulated, for 2 days after from one set. And that's kind of a good indication that, all right, that's sufficient. If you're so sore that you can't train for 5 days after, that's something you're not looking for on a week by week basis. So managing this stimulus to fatigue ratio is hyper important. Generally, you're looking at about 2 to 6 sets per body part per session and a couple sessions per week. Anywhere in that range, and for most people, most of the time, you will be stimulated enough but not fatigued enough that you can progress over time. So 2 to 6 sets of hard work. You got to get that close proximity to failure. If you're pushing like 6+ sets in a session, you're either very, very advanced on some kind of special source, or your actual sets aren't that close to failure. You could have also just been choosing really great exercises, but generally 12 sets per week is of good quality work is massive amounts. If anyone's telling you they're doing 60 sets, watch their sets. They're going nowhere near close enough to failure to really cause a stimulus. So you're just talking about, with programming, you're managing these sets over weeks, starting at the lower range, that minimum effective dose of training. If you feel like you're not progressing each week, add a set, add the smallest viable amount to that training load and see how you adapt for a couple of weeks. You don't need to go crazy and change everything. It will just take a bit of time. And training frequency, again, is dictated by these principles we've already talked about. This is a good deep dive. This is the second part of this hypertrophy. Next episodes are going to be spreading out a little bit, but what we're going to talk about now, last 6 minutes, is nutrition. Now, quality is a huge thing here. So I used to just excuse me. I used to just be like, all right, if it fits your macros, it's fine. You can eat anything as long as it fits your macros, which is true. Like just quickly, the foundational principles for building muscle. probably want to be in a calorie surplus unless you're extremely overweight. You want to eat between 1.6 grams and 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram. So if you're 80 kilos, you can eat anything from 1.6 to 2.2, which would be like, well, 100 kilos is easier, so I can do the maths. 100 kilos, you're looking at 160 grams or 220 grams of protein, if that makes sense. 100 kilos, 1.6 grams to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Simple maths, and generally that will set you up for success. Spread the protein throughout the day, and remaining calories for that surplus that you're looking for should be split between carbs and fats. More carbs around the training the better generally, but you still want sufficient fats to kind of, for health, effectively, you need your fats. So nutrition, so when I was just like, first started, like when I was 16, 17, whatever, I was just like, alright, takeaways, protein shakes, and shit, like I would eat so bad, like McDonald's a few times a week, just because it's in my macros, my skin was terrible, felt bad, because quality matters. Like, I don't care what you say, you can do it if it fits your macros, but there will be a trade-off with regards to how you feel and how you function. Some people are just different, alright? You're always going to have people who can just eat terribly and still perform extremely highly, but I still think there should be a pursuit of quality with everything. So I'd recommend trying to keep these calories clean, what you're getting the protein from. Initially when people start doing this, they think they need to eat more protein than they actually do. So it's a bit overwhelming. They're like, imagine like a 50, 60 kilo female thinking she needs to eat 200 grams of protein and she's never really eaten that much protein. Like, that's such a big lifestyle change. Just improve. It's about the pursuit of quality, adding a little bit extra each week. I'm adding a shake in after my training, there's an extra 40 grams of protein, for example. Those small differences add up greatly over time. And if you're 50 kilos, like you're looking at like 80 grams of protein. That is so manageable. 1.6 grams per 50 kilos of body weight. Like, that's so manageable. The lower end of this scale is where most people should start. And if you miss a day, it's generally fine. It's just about trying to be as consistent as possible over time. There's loads of studies, like just being 80% accurate with your nutrition yields most of the results. That's just Pareto's principle. 80% gives you 20% of the work, gives you 80% of the results. You always got 20% of the people doing 80% of the productivity in society. That's just principle across time, and you can apply it to your nutrition and your training, but still pursuit of quality. And how do you know you're in a calorie surplus? Get on the weighing scales. The weight should be slowly tracking up. You're looking at about 1% gained per month, 1 to 2% of body weight gain per month. So again, if you're 80 kilos, looking to gain about 800 grams to 1.6 kilos per month. If you're 100 kilos, 1 kilo to 2 kilos per month. At the lower end of that scale, if you're more advanced, again, building it nice and slowly. Slower is better when you're trying to gain muscle, in my opinion. There's no rush, you don't want to gain too much body fat, and it's just kind of how long can you hold on to the bulk, to building muscle, without feeling like you're getting too fat. So slower is going to be significantly better there. Take your time with these gaining phases, and enjoy eating more food, because it's great. Yeah, hope you enjoyed the video, hope you enjoyed the podcast, I should say. Episode 2 done, and I hope you have a great day.